Good day to you viewers, the Colonel speaking to you live from the Lay Rectory for British Imperial YouTube Broadcasting, and it's another Squire Rambles on. I can't remember which part it is, sadly.
Well, I think it's either 13 or 14, but I can't remember.
It's a Game of Thrones special, as you can see from the picture there. That is not the Squire you're looking at. He's here, but that's not him. He's not one of the Sons of the Harpy, as far as I'm aware,
no,
anyway.
Indeed not.
Well, we were asked a question some time ago that we'd mentioned Game of Thrones several times, and would we care to do a video about our interest in it?
Well, that sounds like a reasonable plan.
So here we are.
Here we are.
I suppose I ought to say I was responsible for this this one of the Squire's interests, because just about 18 months ago, it's not that long ago, I should stress, I was about to move into the Preceptory, the builders were going out, and I had time on my hands, and for some odd reason I think I first noticed Game of Thrones in newspaper adverts or something like that, and I think I assumed it was a computer game.
Well, that's what I thought. I'd heard a lot about it, people had talked about it in various articles in the paper, but I hadn't realised anything like what it was.
Well, I had a bit of time on my hands, as I say, because the builders were leaving the Preceptory in it and then had a roof on and things like that. And I was looking on YouTube, and some of the clips from the first series of Game of Thrones came up on the computer, and I watched a few of them, and I thought, this is absolutely awful. The horrible swearing, the nudity and vulgarity, and the blood and guts, and I thought, this is dreadful rubbish. So I ignored it for about a week, and then another one came up, and so I thought, oh well, maybe I'll give it another go. And no, my feelings were still the same, but I was intrigued, and I think I mentioned it to you at the time.
That's right, yes.
So I then bought the first 3 series on DVD. Then I thought, well, they're written by some Yank, so are they going to be any good? So I bought the books. They were on special offer. And by golly, I was in for a surprise. I put the first disc in of Series 1 at about, I don't know, 9 o'clock in the evening. And it was about 3 o'clock the following morning when I looked up at the clock, and I thought, oh my golly, this really is worthwhile. And the next time the Squire came over, I showed you that first series, didn't I?
Yes, indeed, yes. I think it's one of those things that the first series is where it's just, that's one where you can get totally confused, because if you come to the first series, you don't know anything about it at all. You don't know the names, you don't know the houses, you don't know the places. But as it gets, it's one of those things you need to watch 2 or 3 times to really get to know it all.
You most certainly did. Well, I'd started watching Series 1, I think, and the books arrived, and I started on them, and I was very surprised. I think in Series 1 I got to the bit where Ned Stark gets his head cut off, and I thought, that's very peculiar. Yeah. A leading major character gets their head cut off, and you think, well, this is going to be something different.
And my word, it is different. For a start, it's extremely... a lot of the writing is very, very good, and it's not American in style at all. It's classic English.
Well, this is my point. When I was reading
classic English, it's amazing, really.
I know some of the actors are American, but you don't really notice that. The fact is, you know, I didn't realise at the time there was a difference between the series and the books. I started reading the books, and I thought, this is most peculiar. They're not American at all. No. They use some of the language, unfortunately. But, you know, I thought, this is really odd, and I was reading loads of this stuff, waiting to get into the house, and everything was packed up. And I started Series 2, and it became apparent that Series 1, they hadn't got a huge budget. They obviously didn't know quite who would watch it, or who it was aimed at. And so there's a lot of nudity and ghastly swearing and violence. But Series 2 was toned down a little bit.
I think as time goes on, that has been toned down, and I think the thing is, though, that the people that were using the language were the people, were the characters weren't in real life would expect to use language like that.
I suppose so.
You know, they were the foot soldiers and the the rougher types really. And
well, one character who did use a certain word I was not amused about hearing was Tyrion Lannister. So I got on my computer. I thought, oh right, we'll find out. Before I had the series, we'll find out how he gets killed because he deserves it. Well, that was my opinion then. But now I regard him as one of the best characters, and that's one of the genius parts of the books and the series, because the series is different from the books. They use the characters' names, things like that, but storylines have been amalgamated and a lot of extraneous stuff cut out, because you've only got 10 hours per series, and you couldn't get the books into it. But I was looking him up, but he's, like most of the characters, they evolve, they adapt, they change, they mature, and that's extraordinary.
Well, that character most certainly has matured over the time. And the other thing about it, which is something very different, in a lot of adventure series, is like Tolkien. You get the goods and the bads. You get the horrible orcs, and you get the hobbits. But in this, a lot of the people are half good and half bad.
Well, it's much more realistic and shaded.
Yeah, exactly, and you never know quite how somebody's going to turn out.
No, exactly. They could start good and turn out really bad.
Exactly. That makes it a bit of a roller coaster ride.
Yeah.
I mean, plus the fact the special effects are, I should think, second to none.
Well, the fact is, in the first series, there's a lot of interior. I would say to people, if you're watching it for the first time, get through the first series. You'll find out the basics from that. Series 2 and 3 then get a lot more. They had a much bigger budget by then. They realised they got a hit on their hands.
Yeah.
They took a step back and replanned it, I think, and got something much greater than they'd started with, and it's been well worth it.
I think another thing is if somebody buys a set of DVDs. And I've got a box set of Series 1 to 5, and I've just bought Series 6 as well. What I would suggest to people is try and watch some of the special features first.
Right.
Not the commentaries so much, but explaining things. They're with the DVD. You'll find under special features. You'll find explanations as to the names of the houses, the coats of arms, or as they call them in the series, sigils, and the words and the places. And then I think it makes it easier to follow, because I think if you don't do that, it is a bit tricky to follow. But I think once you know it, it is unbelievably good. And I think you can just see it over and over again and still see things you miss, because to be honest, there is so much in a programme. You
do miss a lot.
Absolutely.
And what you don't realise, in later series, people turn up who were in the first couple of series.
Very much
but you didn't notice them.
Exactly.
They were there. It's most curious. You know, they use these sigils, which is Latin sigillium, which means sign, of course, rather than coats of arms. So he has sort of adapted it a bit. But as you were saying about Tolkien, it makes Tolkien look almost not childish, but for children. Because with Tolkien, it's good and bad, black and white. You know who's who, and you basically know what's going to happen in the end. You know, the king is going to win. But in this, it's very much up in the air.
I think the thing is, Tolkien is absolutely first class. There's no doubt about it. I mean, The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. I enjoy those two film series very much indeed. But Game of Thrones takes that idea to a stage further, in the sense that, like Tolkien, George Martin has created a world.
He has.
A world of places, and the places vary from north of the Wall, where you've got the wildlings and the army of the dead, right through to the south of the continent or the world, down to places like Dawn, which is basically the Mediterranean.
Well, that's Westeros, and then there's a lot of other countries and places, the Summer Isles and all this sort of Sothoros and all sorts of things, which haven't even touched on yet. I think, even if I don't want him to, he dropped dead tomorrow, there'd be 50 or 100 different stories just out of places that he's mentioned.
Well, they're talking about it's going to be another 2 series.
Yes.
I think they could do another five series at least, because
he jolly well could.
They could almost keep it going indefinitely, because as the books come out, I mean, Yeah, I think one of the things to remember is that saying of Cersei Lannister when she says to, I think it's Robb Stark, no, Eddard Stark in the Game of Thrones, you either win or you die. There is no middle ground, and that's a pretty good statement.
It is. It's what happened in the real medieval world.
Absolutely. You see,
no one knew the outcome before.
No. But you see, a lot of it is based on the Wars of the Roses, and there's so much other historical background to it. You see, in the last series, you see Old Town.
Yes.
They take you to Old Town, and then you see what you imagine to be the Pharos of Alexandria.
Yes.
And the Great Library of Alexandria.
Yes, exactly.
It's like in earlier series where they have Bravos, and they've got the Titan of Bravos, which is the huge statue
Colossus
straddling,
of Rhodes.
like the Colossus of Rhodes.
Yeah.
So there are historic backgrounds, and then of course Marine, you've got pyramids.
Yes.
You've got the Pyramid of Marine.
Which could be Egypt, could be Mexico.
Absolutely. But you see, there is so much to it. There's so much in it.
There is.
So it's rather like a game of chess. It gets more and more engrossing as time goes on.
Well, chess. Yes, I was reading about the history of chess. It was some Arabic game, and they used to shout chess at the end or something like that, meaning the king is dead.
Yeah.
You know, it's not checkmate, that's what it meant, checkmate. That's what they used to shout, because the king is dead. It's most curious. You read so much into it, then you can read so much around it. He's really packed an awful lot of stuff in there.
But there's so many sort of so much historical background sources that he's used into it, that's incorporated. And you see the thing of it, if you look at it quickly, it looks a little bit like, in some ways, like the British Isles, because you've got an area north of the wall which you think of perhaps as early Scotland. Then you've got the wall, which you'd equate to Hadrian's Wall, and then you've got the north part of England, and then you come down towards the south part of England.
Yes.
As if you keep,
and it gets warmer,
and then you go further, and it's sort of like going across continents, and then of ending up. There's the deserts, the desert countries where the Dothraki are.
Oh yes, they could be, the Mongol hordes. Who knows?
Well, yes, exactly.
Or the Huns, the real Huns in Hungary.
That's right, exactly. Yes.
And think the horse tribes of Middle Europe.
Yes, so who
knows?
Definitely.
It's wonderful how he chucks all this stuff in, and it really does make you think.
And of course they have created, I think, is it 4 new languages for it?
They have. That's for the television programme. There's very little in books of languages.
So they've got Dothraki, High Valyrian.
Yes.
And what else? Dornish.
Giscari.
Yeah. So they're 4 languages that have been specially created.
Amazing.
Self-contained. It's not. It doesn't sort of lend itself to anything else.
No,
if you started filling government paperwork up in High Valyrian, I mean that would really chuck it, wouldn't it? You can imagine Sir Humphrey Appleby in Yes Minister coming up against the paperwork in Dothraki.
That's it. You've got characters like Sir Humphrey in there.
Very much so. Yes.
Very much like that. Which, you could say they're Confucian from Chinese culture.
Yes, that's right.
These things are not, there's no limit to them. I was rather concerned at watching this thing that it wasn't entirely serious. So, but it was a friend of mine and an educated person, we'll call him, who said to me, "Oh, you should be reading or watching Game of Thrones. It's awfully good." And I thought my leg was being pulled, as it often is at high table. But he said, no, you ought to get it. It really is very popular in the academic community. And I said, well, why? And he said, because of all the references. And then I saw that book by Clive James, which I bought because he's not too well at the moment, and he's been watching box sets, and he regards Game of Thrones as one of the best things he's ever seen. And that's Clive James. And you think, well, how extraordinary. But as he said, it's the naked power, naked absolute power play, which is so engrossing, but also the interplay of the characters, who are so well written.
And also, and in my opinion, the amount of really good common sense.
Yes.
And if you want to listen to a run of that, you want to get onto that thing on the YouTube where they sort of have the life of
Wisdom of Tywin Lannister.
Wisdom of Tywin Lannister. That is that's played by Charles Dance.
But what
it's just remarkable. I mean, there's some of the sayings are perfectly good.
Well,
and
this
make
is it.
Perfect sense.
Well, that's what we'll
I'll
keep
leave
going.
that for the butler.
Yeah. I thought I saw him out putting the empties out. Anyway,
could be, yes.
But this is what Clive James was saying. That part, Tywin Lannister, is the best part any actor could be given. And Charles Dance comes into it and absolutely hits it for 6. He is Tywin Lannister. I can't watch him in anything else.
And I can't imagine anybody else in that part.
No, I can't.
And I think a master class of acting is when you get him in those scenes up against Diana Rigg as the Queen of Thorns. I mean,
Diana
those
Rigg,
two are being just unbelievable. Really unbelievable.
You wouldn't think such acting could...
That is a real master class.
It is astonishing. Absolutely astonishing. And her and the High Sparrow.
Yes, that's right.
Jonathan Pryce, another fellow who... You can't imagine anyone else in it.
No, you see, it's one of those things that you can't. People in the past have made the huge mistake of remaking popular series.
Yes.
You've seen it time and time again where they've tried to remake it with the same characters with new people. You can't.
Well, the newer Brideshead Revisited was an absolute load of tat.
Well, I didn't like that at all. I think, to be honest, if it comes to, let's say, Miss Marple.
Oh yes.
But to me, I mean, the best Miss Marple has got to be Joan Hickson.
Yes.
I don't care what anybody says. All the others, it's just don't
I was watching at Bertram's Hotel the other day. That was very good.
Yes.
That's dear old Jane Marple. She looks 100. That was Fenella Fielding.
Oh, I know, they're amazing.
And the thing is with Game of Thrones, I find it very difficult to watch a lot of programmes having seen that. Because in that programme, or over the so far, 6 series, the characters evolve. They've got space to be real people. So when you watch a Poirot or something, and you've got to get used to all the characters, all the foibles, in an hour, and sort of keep up the mystery, they can't do it.
No.
It's two-dimensional. It doesn't work for me anymore. But with Game of Thrones, I can watch a series again and again. I haven't watched the Harry Potter films again. I probably should do. And as I say, it's even soured The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, because you think, well, this is all very, very two-dimensional. But with Game of Thrones, you don't know what the hell's going to happen next. You don't know who's going to get their head chopped off. The battle scene in the last series, where Jon Snow was there, it looked like they were finished. But over the hill came the 7th Cavalry.
You see, that was that's a remarkable military. That's a remarkable military strategy, where the Stark army was in the middle.
Yeah.
And the Boltons had surrounded them,
yes.
and they were closing in. So they were pushing them inwards.
Yeah.
And then the other people, the Knights of the Vale, came, and they had them from the back because they weren't defended at the back. It was an amazing piece of strategy.
Well, it was a classic bit of Roman strategy. I was saying, a friend of mine was saying to me, "Oh well, how do you rate Game of Thrones as an historical set of books?" I said, well, the thing is, to have written that, you would need to read all sorts of books. Machiavelli, The Prince, you need von Clausewitz on the art of war, you need all the ancient books of politics, Aristotle. You'd have to read so many. And that's, having read the books, I've noticed a slight uneven quality. And I have wondered more than once when reading it whether it wasn't just him writing them. I did think of not a committee writing them, but it seems to be a superhuman effort.
Well, it's an amazing work because how many books is it now? Is it 6 or 7 books?
I think it's 5 books in 7 volumes.
Ah, okay, yes.
It's about 4,000 pages.
Yes.
Which I've read about 5 times now.
Really, you're talking of the size of a set of old encyclopedias.
You are, more or less, yes. It's it covers an incredible amount of history that I'd not heard of. But when people have got into this, and there are websites I haven't looked at, I haven't found them, they're out there, and forums and God knows what about this, where they discuss quite fine points of very, it's like a high table discussion, some of this stuff.
Absolutely, very much so. Yes,
on where he gets his inspiration. And I must admit, obscure is not the word. I had a classical education, but by golly, this stuff is absolutely incredibly deep.
As you say, there's so much in it. It's taken from so many diverse
real
sources.
Incidents and sources.
You see that I was talking about that battle. Well, I read somewhere that was an enactment of a real battle when the Romans were surrounded.
Yes.
I can't remember which one it was.
It was probably the Teutoburg Forest where they actually lost several legions.
It was something like
Augustus
that.
was not terribly amused.
It was something like
that. But
that.
that's again an inspiration because George R.R. Martin actually says how much he enjoyed I, Claudius.
Yes.
Well, I love I, Claudius.
Yes.
I didn't see it. Well, I think it was a bit on late when I was a child when it was first shown. But I got it a few years ago on DVD and I was absolutely engrossed by that. Robert Graves isn't George R.R. Martin by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a damn good series. And it's well worth watching for the sort of power play of it all.
Well, this is the thing, and you see the point is with Game of Thrones. It's you see, some series you can say are about a country. Some series are about a town or a village, but this is about a complete world.
He's chucked in the whole blessed lot.
A world.
You can find a lot of Confucius things, references. You can find a lot of international history.
Very much so.
Some Russian history I've noticed not put in there. Chinese, Japanese, some of that history and myths and legends. It's extraordinary.
I know what you mean. Yes, it is amazing. There's no.
I don't know who the Iron Islanders are supposed to be, but they could be just about anybody.
Obviously a seagoing people, sea-based. I'm not quite sure. I haven't quite worked them out yet. But no, it's amazing, really. It
really is incredible, and it's something I've recommended to a number of people who say, oh, it's quite a lot to get into. And another one, which I agreed with at the time, I don't like fantasy. And I said to him, well, the fact is, the fantasy and the dragons and the magic and that are not there in episode 1. No. Well, they are. They're hinted at. But they're not full in your face all the way through. They gradually evolve, and that's the genius of it all.
Well, I think the thing is, I think the impact of when Daenerys walks into the funeral pyre, and comes, and the funeral pyre is burnt down, and they see her the next morning alive with 3 dragons, which have hatched from the eggs. I mean, that's got a certain amount of impact.
But then you think, well, how did she end up with 3 dragon eggs? Well, they were a present from Illyrio Miltiades. Now, who's he? And he's linked to Lord Varys. And you think, well, blimey, what is their game? And you think that about almost every character. What is their motivation? What is going on? What is their end game, if they have one at all? Are they going with the flow, or are they just waiting for their opportunity?
I think waiting for their opportunity.
And where does it start? Some people say, oh, well, it was Varys probably caused the problems and Robert's rebellion and all this sort of thing. And you think, well, it wasn't then. This is a permanently a cyclical thing. It's happened throughout history where rulers or monarchs, whoever they might be, come to power, then eventually die or fall in some way, and then the whole circle begins again with another group of people coming up.
But it's all a question of a powerful person going, and then there's a power vacuum, and somebody goes in to fill it.
And someone or some group of people come in and have to defeat one or other of the other groups of people who would have been having a go.
Yes.
And that may take 100 years of history to do it.
Absolutely, very much so.
It's very, very, very strange. It's very peculiar, but it's very, very interesting. I can't tell people how interesting it is.
I think to anybody, I've found it, because I'm getting on a bit, and I think as an older person, I find it very interesting because there is history in it, and there is so much good sense. You see, to me, in my opinion, good sense is sadly lacking in a lot of things these days.
Yes.
It's all.
What's your favourite quote of Tywin Lannister? I've forgotten the exact quote now.
Oh heavens, can I remember? Ooh, memory like a sieve. I can't remember.
Yes, we were discussing a hunt going out on Foxback earlier.
Oh, I know.
Well, wish I could draw cartoons. I do think that was brilliant.
Well, I think we'll have to remedy. That'll have to be remedied. The squire going hunting, riding the fox, hunting the horses. You know, be rather funny. That's got to come.
All I would say is some of those horses, they can go fast, and they haven't. I've never found the brakes. But that's a thing, you know. They have all the horses in this thing, and all these actors have to ride these blighters.
Well, I was on one of the special features in the last series. They were talking to the man who plays Jon Snow, and when you see him standing there and he's got these horses charging at him, he has, because apparently for that battle they had 500 extras and 80 horses.
Yeah.
So 40 horses on each side. They were charging each other. It was flat out charging.
That's absolutely.
And he was being, you know, I was standing there with these things coming straight at me. You know, what's going to happen now?
Well, that's when you need a sort of cinema scale screen, don't you? Because it was frightened me to death. There's that wonderful thing on YouTube taken from Young Winston where the last charge of the British Army. It wasn't. That was in Russia in 1917 or 18, I think. But, you know, seeing a cavalry charge, that's no joke. That must be very frightening.
Oh, yeah.
And frighten the living daylights out of me, because I know what horses are like. They don't stop.
Yeah, but you think about a fully armoured knight with a blessed broadsword coming at you on horseback, and God,
that's a thing to be fit, especially if you're one of the peasants with some sort of tree branch as a weapon or some nonsense. Then you haven't got a blessed chance.
Well, basically, I mean, the knights were basically the tanks of the day, weren't they?
Yeah,
really?
But the thing is, the horses weren't as they are now. They weren't on cart horses. They were on quite small horses. They wouldn't have been the monsters.
I think what they did, I mean, I'm not an expert on horses, but I think what they had to do was to carry the weight, would have had half-bred cart horses. So they would be quite heavy to carry the weight.
That's actually a misapprehension from Henry V, where they're sort of winching a knight onto a horse. You wouldn't do that, because if you fell off, you'd be dead. No, I think armour is very light. It has to be. It has to be just strong enough to, you know, ward off a blow. Obviously, an arrow would go straight through some of it, or at least do you a very, very unpleasant mischief.
Yeah.
But you know, the idea of winching knights onto horses is just from Henry V. It's the film. It wasn't reality. It would have been impossible.
Well, that's right.
You know, you'd had a chain mail and probably a leather, leather underneath to, you know, but that thing in your hand, that bit of steel, that was what would do the damage. They do not like it up 'em.
No, exactly, very much.
And that's why they have those pikemen, and those pikes are 20 foot long.
Yes.
But once you get past the end of them, you're at them.
Absolutely.
That was, you know, it was a serious matter, but they weren't that effective.
No.
And most battles in the medieval period, I would imagine, have just been fairly carnage, of people going each other with sort of meat cleavers and things.
Well,
very nasty.
Anything they couldn't have hands on.
Exactly.
See, the thing is, when we've got all today's modern armoury, we've got all today's high technology, but you think what a battalion of archers could still do today.
Absolutely.
You think what archers could do today.
Well, things like trebuchets and things like that, they weren't for us a joke.
I mean, I've been watching another thing, a bit similar, Kingdom of Heaven, a film.
Oh, yes.
I mean,
the Crusades, yes.
A lot of trebuchets in there. And
yes.
Swinging stuff about.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I think even today in the modern army, some archers couldn't half wreak some
There's
havoc.
that fabulous video, it may still be on YouTube. I saw it as a film years and years ago of a trebuchet throwing an upright piano.
Oh, yes, I remember that. Yes,
and they actually set fire to one of the pianos and then struck it, which was even funnier. But that's a serious bit of kit that can throw one of those, and some of them are bigger than that.
But they reckon the idea was to throw one of the things was to chuck a horse or a cow, a dead horse or a cow,
straight over a wall,
over a wall, and poison the people inside. That was one of the idea. But they certainly built that trebuchet.
Or things like grape shot, essentially. Filling them up with stones and chucking it over.
Well, that's right.
That would be pretty nasty stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
And in those days, sort of a wound could mean death.
However, well, I think to be honest, it generally was.
I think people were hardier in those days. No antibiotics.
No. But then, of course, I think there again, you did have far more herbalists.
People assume that people today assume people in the past were stupid, and they certainly weren't.
No, there was far more to it than that.
They do things differently there.
I used to work in a place where I used to look after a whole lot of old books, and I found these books, and they were about a papyrus that was found in ancient Egypt.
Oh yes.
About the surgical papyrus, it was called.
Yes.
And it was describing the operations that were attempted in those days.
Yes.
And they were even doing simple brain surgery, and this was thousands and thousands
Well, they
of
were
years ago.
trepanning, drilling holes in people's heads
that's
to
right.
relieve the pressure.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, it sort of worked.
Well, it was certainly a very, very interesting thing to look at.
So people weren't entirely stupid in the past.
No, I don't think so.
They didn't know a lot of things that we do now, but they sort of got round the problem by doing things in a slightly different way.
I think they knew other things that we've forgotten about.
I think that's very true. But the thing is, people say to me, oh, well, it's all in the past, but it isn't. The politics behind Game of Thrones you can see in almost every workplace to this very day.
Oh, very much so, absolutely.
You can see what's the power play in any job situation.
I could name one or two people who do fit into Game of Thrones with no artificial aids.
I think some of them think they're in Game of Thrones, but whether they could actually survive in it, I'm not so certain. It's easy when it's handed to you on a plate, but you've always got to be watching your back in these places.
Oh, very much so. Oh, indeed, yes. No, fascinating series. I think I'm looking forward with great interest to the new series coming out.
Well, I wonder what's going to happen. I just don't know. Who would you say has the best chance of winning? When I say winning, of course, I mean winning out of the characters we know, because of course it doesn't end with whoever these bunch of characters we know. It will go on and on.
Well, I suppose the front runners would obviously be Daenerys Targaryen.
Yes.
Tyrion Lannister.
Yes.
Maybe. Cersei, possibly. Yes. Jon Snow, maybe. So you've got 4 there.
And yes, and you've got people like Sansa Stark.
Exactly.
Or Arya.
Exactly. See, there are plenty of. It's still to be played out.
It's up in the air.
It's like Russian roulette, really. It's just waiting to see who gets.
And what about the White Walkers?
Well, that's the one. That's really the one that's going to finish them, isn't it?
What happens with them?
Exactly.
And the fact is, I like the fact that he would say that you are your enemy's enemy. So if you turn the whole thing round for their perspective, then everyone in Westeros is an enemy.
Yes, that's right.
And it takes a different perspective, which you don't find in things like The Hobbit, because there isn't enough time in the. This. I think he started out to write 3 books, and he's now written 5 in 7 volumes. Yeah. And I think there's at least, he says, 2 more to go.
Well, in that case, then you can see there may even be. I reckon with the success, if the success rate is continued, and you think of all the fun and games that when this last series was launched nearly 12 months ago, you can imagine it even going on even longer.
Well, yes.
With the demand would have to be filled.
Well, this is it. It's awakened a huge interest in history and politics, and the history of politics in a lot of people who I think without this might not have been interested.
No, very much so.
Because, if you want to read The Prince, which is all very well in theory, this is it in practice. You can actually see, cause and effect. And the fact that very often, whatever plans people have had, you have the law of unintended consequences coming into play. So that what they intended happens, but if half a dozen other things also happen which negate the thing they wanted to happen, so they have to divert their plan, which however fixed a plan you have in any political situation, it has to be flexible. And you often end up with a consequence you didn't want.
Well, very, very much so, indeed, yes.
Because, often the outcome is ambiguous.
Very much so.
Because you have Robert Baratheon winning the rebellion, but then, it turns out that his children weren't his.
No.
So, and none of them will sit, 2 of them have sat the throne, Tom and Joffrey, and Marcella got poisoned.
Yeah.
So they're all gone, even though they weren't his.
That's right.
But there is some speculation about Gendry being his real son with Cersei.
That was the
blacksmith.
Blacksmith, yeah. Because he's disappeared temporarily from the scene.
Yes.
It'd be interesting.
But he was sort of combined with another character in the books,
yes.
and it was a more complicated. But there's all sorts of strange goings on. So he won. You often win the war and lose the peace.
Well, I mean that's what happened in the Second World War, wasn't it?
Yes.
Hitler always said it would happen, and it did. The Allies won the war and then lost the peace.
Yeah.
And we're still paying for it to this day.
Well, that's the point. That is politics. Whatever you want or intend as an outcome doesn't always work out that way.
No, it doesn't. It certainly doesn't.
And Robert won the rebellion, had 15 years of more or less peace. But then it's all coming back again.
Of course it is.
Most of this stuff does not go away.
No,
it's a sort of perpetual problem.
Well, it's like life generally. I think a young person leaves school, goes to university, comes out of college, and then they have their plans, what they're going to try and do in their lives. They've got a list of things, a list of hit lists they want to do. Well, I reckon if a person achieves half what they started out to do, I think they've done very well.
Well,
because
yes.
a lot of people don't even achieve that, and through no fault of their own.
I didn't think that I would end up where I have, in the position that I'm in, but then I didn't give it a great deal of consideration. It just seems to have happened. It's strange, really. And you could ended up on the farm.
Well, the point is, it's all a question of. I know if is no argument,
no.
But if my father had lived, say, another 2 or 3 years, I think I would have still been on the farm, and everything that's happened in the last 40 years wouldn't have happened.
But it would have been a different path, and the fact is, had you stayed on the land, I don't think you'd be here today. Well, I think it would have finished you off. The hard work and the lack of money and the fact that farming's gone downhill for someone with 110 acres, it's almost uneconomic for that sort of size of farm now.
Well, it was getting totally uneconomic then, and it got to the stage that the farm was undercapitalised. It needed a large investment to actually sort it out, and all the buildings wanted repairing, the house wanted a lot of work doing to it. It just it was totally uneconomic. And when my father died, I remember Mother and I went to see the bank manager, and I'm not talking about bank staff now. I mean the bank manager who sat there in a suit and tie, and you sat down and talked to you the possibilities. And he said, "Well, I think your only answer is to sell up. So because, well, basically they wouldn't back us. They wouldn't. They said, no. Well, Nigel is what, 21. You're Mrs. Phillips. You're just over 60, and they reckon wouldn't have it. So I didn't really get much of a say.
But the thing is, had your father lasted a couple of extra years, the farm would have been worth twice what you sold it for.
Well, that's the annoying part. You see, we sold the farm in the spring of 1971, and we got a certain amount for it. But, and if there again, it's no good looking back on hindsight. Because if is no argument. But if we'd have held on to it for another 6 months, quite honestly, we would have got as much again.
But that's the thing in life, as your father, who we may favourably compare to Tywin Lannister, said, make a decision.
Absolutely.
But a decision that looks terrible, again, this is the strange philosophical concept of Game of Thrones. A decision that looks terrible today might in 6 months look like the best thing you could have done. But in a year after that, it might again look terrible. And it's a constantly it's all a matter of perspective and how things work out. You could have sold that farm 6 months later and got half the price. It all depends, doesn't it?
See, it goes back to the old thing. It's the trouble is today, too many people what I call whiffle and waffle in the chatter. They've got too many people have their heads in the clouds, and they don't want to face reality. No. If something is going to happen, you've got to face it and do something about it.
You can't stick your head in the sand.
No. It's like when I moved here. I've been in the lay rectory now for nearly 3 years.
Amazing.
And the house I lived in before was very nice. It was a big bungalow on nearly an acre of ground. Well, that too needed a lot of money spending on it, and I couldn't raise the funds to do it. Plus the fact I was approaching retirement, and the place would have been too big. I mean, I certainly couldn't cope with an acre of ground now.
And a couple of winters in that place, it would have been dreadful.
Well, absolutely. So I moved, and luckily I made the best move I've ever made. And I'm
but that's
very
the
pleased
point
with
in life. You have to make a decision at some point.
Yeah.
And you have to live with the consequences
Very
of that
much
decision.
So. Yeah.
And you know, they can be good, they can be bad. It's you know, this is why Game of Thrones is. There are philosophical books written about the ideas in and behind Game of Thrones. We could go on forever about them, but you know, you can learn an awful lot from that program if you've got half sensible. You can actually sort of use it to your advantage.
Am I right in thinking that some colleges run courses on Game of Thrones?
I believe they're right there. You can. I bought a book recently, the philosophical theories behind it. The people have written academic papers about it, which is extraordinary.
But then I can understand it to a certain extent because it's a phenomenon that hasn't been seen before.
I still wonder how one man can write it all. It is very uneven texturally. And he uses some words in one part, but then that may be the fact that it takes 4 or 5 years to write a book. You know, the last one came out, I think, 6 years ago.
Really?
And do you imagine, you know, the wait people have had? I've only been interested sort of just under 2 years, and that's long enough.
Yes, of course.
But I've watched sort of 3 extra series since then. I think I first started when the 4th series had just come out.
Oh yes.
And I bought the 4th series of DVDs when they came out then. And thought, golly, this is... And the last 2 I've actually watched live and been absolutely astonished by it.
Well, some of the things in the last one were just... I mean, that battle in the second last episode was unbelievable. And at the very end when Cersei blows up the Sept of Baelor, I mean, that's that blimmin' great bronze bell come flying through the air. I mean, that would make anybody think.
Astonishing.
I mean, that really put the icing on the cake, didn't it? Because there was this huge explosion. And also this massive bronze bell just comes flying through the air, hits a building and crashes and kills about 3 people underneath it. It was just
absolutely
amazing.
Extraordinary stuff.
Yeah.
I think they're basing that the substance, what do they call, wildfire, on the Greek, I forget what they call it now. Not wildfire, it was Greek fire, wasn't it? Yes. And no one knows to this day how they made it, but it was obviously some chemical, a bit like napalm, probably more than explosive, but it certainly did a heck of a lot of damage and put the fear up a lot of people. But it's a great series. I could recommend it to anyone.
I would say it's one of those things you have to. It's a bit like riding a horse. Sometimes you've got to stick your knees in and sit on that saddle, and you've got to, you've got to persist. And see it. Then I think when you've seen it, and I think you need to see the whole 6 series to really appreciate it. I mean, that is what 60 or 70, nearly 70 hours of viewing. But if you can get through that, and you can see,
you've got an education. You really have.
It's an amazing.
If you've got half the sense to see the lessons involved.
Exactly.
And,
yes.
Things like that.
That's right. Yeah.
And the fact, of politics. I'm trying to remember that quote of Tywin Lannister's. But I can't remember what it is. How annoying. I'll put it in the description anyway.
I know, I just can't remember it. Oh. No, I can't. It's just gone.
No, never mind.
Well, I mean, that particular role is so full of good
well, yes, as I say, Clive James said it's the best role any actor's ever been given, and Charles Dance rises to it. You know, most of his other parts are fairly forgettable, but with this, it was a role of genius. Again, like Diana Rigg as the Queen of Thorns. But then, Charles, you think of Tywin Lannister's motivation. They were running out of gold. His back was at the wall.
That's right.
Their entire reputation was built on paying their bills, which they weren't able to do.
That's right.
Or wouldn't soon be able to do, so he had to play to win.
Exactly, very much so.
And, in the end he overlooked his son, and that was the fatal,
Yeah.
I won't say the Achilles heel, because he wasn't shot in the heel.
No.
But even then he was being poisoned. There was no doubt about it. Someone was having a go at him, somewhere.
Yes, I wonder about him sometimes.
Yeah.
I still wonder whether he might make another appearance later on.
Well, who knows? You don't know, do you?
I think he was too. I think Tywin Lannister was too good a character to lose that early on in the series.
Well, I was watching the scene where the giants and the wildlings invade Castle Black, and that archer fires an arrow into the giant, and the giant just lazily pulls him off and smashes him against the wall. And I thought that really is naked power.
Yeah.
You know, when you can do things like that.
Oh, it's just unbelievable.
But when you see the world around us today, we've got, you know, a Brexit government.
Yeah.
We've got Donald Trump in America winding up a few people, causing considerable ripples, especially with the Chinese. That's not such a great idea.
I think, to be honest, I think now we're nearly, in December.
Yes.
About 2 weeks from Christmas, and not long from the New Year and the New Year's Day concert, which...
oh yes, here we go again with that.
I've never missed the New Year's Day concert.
No, indeed.
That's the only time in the year where I disconnect all the phones, turn everything off, and I just have my own time for about 2 hours when that's on. That's it. I'm out of it for then. But I think next year is going to be very interesting.
It is. It's going to be very exciting.
I think it's going to be a fascinating year.
I'm looking forward to the next Game of Thrones. Hopefully March, I believe, next year, or April.
Yes, indeed.
So we've only got a matter of weeks to go. And I would say to anyone, watch as many of them as you can, and as many times you will learn something.
Oh, I think it's fair. I think it is. I think what they've done, they've like Tolkien with The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, and like to a certain extent J.K. Rowling with the Harry Potter series. This is actually a newly created world's classic.
It is,
which will never go away. Which will never be forgotten. It will always. I can imagine it always being talked about.
I can see it being studied as sort of textbooks in schools in 100 years' time.
Very much so.
And so it should be, because it's a good grounding for finding other things out. You know, I quite liked Harry Potter. That I've never been able to read the books twice. I don't know why. The magic just went for me. But, you know, they were good. But they do look a bit
well, you see, the thing
simplistic nowadays.
Well, because they were written for children.
Yes.
That's the other thing. And the other thing about it is it was very well done, in the sense that the series progresses with the child.
Yes.
So if a child sees episode 1 of the first film, the next year they see, if you showed a child every 6 months, that child would have developed in a certain and would be able to take on the next one.
Yes.
But the last two, a small child wouldn't get it. It'd be too much.
That's another
for them.
point. In any other book, you're reading a story from beginning to end. You see it from the narrator or whoever's point of view. In Game of Thrones, it's written not in chapters but in point of view characters, in that you're seeing that aspect of that part of the story from their point of view. There could be an opposite point of view from any of the other characters in that scenario.
Yes, that's right.
And the time is very fluid in these things. Sometimes they're going backwards, sometimes forward, sometimes at the same time in different places. But it's very complicated, but it shouldn't be. If you read it, it's not so much, if you know what I mean.
No.
It's very, very good. But the point of view thing is something to bear in mind. You're only seeing one point of view of one character at one point in time. And you don't see the whole story. That's what makes it so interesting.
That's
and so
right.
different.
Indeed.
But I would recommend it to anyone. I'm sure you would.
I certainly would. Indeed. Let's roll on and wait for the next series to come out.
Excellent. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.